Good evening, guys. Welcome to Mark Anthony's Music Picks, episode 45. Tonight, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite superhero DJs of all time, and that is Jonathan Peters. Jonathan Peters, for people that lived on the East Coast of the US in the early 2000s and were going clubbing in that era, was just an absolute monster. He was in the same league, really, as Danny Tenaglia, Danny Howells, John Digweed. I mean, he was right up there. The difference with Jonathan Peters as compared to somebody like John Digweed or even Danny Howells is that Danny Howells and Digweed were more popular overseas, whereas Jonathan Peters had very much a cult following that was almost exclusively linked to the East Coast of the United States. So Jersey, New York, Philly, and maybe a little bit of DC, maybe. But within that region that he had a huge cult following. I mean, huge. He basically started out DJing in the mid-90s, didn't really blow up, was kind of like putting in his time and grinding it out. And then he finally got his big break at Sound Factory, where he started there in 1997. Now, for people over in the UK, I'm going to try to fill you in because I know that you probably don't know much about Jonathan Peters, but Sound Factory was like the club to go to. People from Philly would drive to New Jersey and then take the train up all the way to go to this club. And it was like the ultimate super club experience. Like for a couple of years there in the early 2000s or late 90s, there really wasn't a club that was better than Sound Factory. A lot of people would argue maybe like Palladium or Twilo or Exit were better, you know, and it's really, a lot of that is in the eye of the beholder. But I can say from the 3 times that I went to Sound Factory, it had probably the most supreme sound system that I've ever heard. There were bass bins on the main floor of that club that were as big as a small car, like a Toyota Prius, and I'm not exaggerating. It was just insane. It had lights, and it had a very intense crowd that was dedicated to the sound of New Jersey, North New Jersey, and New York. And Jonathan Peters was really at the forefront of that sound. He became popular just similar to the way that Danny Tenaglia did by remixing popular artists of the time. So R&B artists would make a hit song, and then Jonathan Peters would come in and put his remix touch on it. Now, as far as the studio goes, he was very much influenced by other co-producers that he had. So even though you might see something labeled as the Jonathan Peters Sound Factory vocal mix, there may have been Jim Hines behind the scenes, or Tony Coluccio, or a couple of other guys that sort of like were in the studio with him all the time. And I think from the late 90s to maybe 2002, I think those guys spent a lot of time in the studio, because if you look at Jonathan Peters' remix discography, I mean, it just goes on for pages and pages and pages. So what I'm going to try to do for you guys today is highlight some of these pop remixes that are also kind of like on the lesser known side of his catalog, and kind of bring them to your attention. There are some other more obvious remixes, like the Whitney Houston one that's behind me, or maybe the Paula Cole remix, which are like kind of, maybe they're not obvious to everybody, but they're obvious already to Jonathan Peters fans. So I'm going to try to keep this a little bit more on the lesser known, lesser played side, so I can kind of like create some novelty for everybody here. The first track that I want to talk about is Brian McKnight. Now, obviously, Brian McKnight was huge in the 90s in the R&B scene, and he did this track here called 6812. Jonathan Peters did a 10-minute vocal remix of this, which is awesome. Now, one thing I want to say, if you end up liking this record and you want to go and buy it, just make sure you get this version that has the 10-minute vocal on it. check this out. It has the classic Brian McKnight vocal in it. And also for the Sound Factory heads that are out there, everybody knows that there were basically two versions of any well-known remix that were out there, right? There was always the vocal mix and the dub mix. Now, the 6812 dub never got pressed to vinyl, which is really sad. That's really, really sad. The dub, for people that don't know what this was all about, the vocal mix would have obviously the vocal that was very familiar, and that would be the one that would kind of like draw everybody into the dance floor. But when it got to be after hours time at Sound Factory, which could be 9 a.m., 10 a.m., noon the next day on Sunday morning, it was time to drop the dub mixes. And the dub mixes didn't sound anything like the original. They were essentially completely astray from the original sound, and they were just these raw, nasty dub beats. I'm gonna actually review one of those later on in this episode. But yeah, this is the vocal mix, 6812, Brian McKnight. I hope you guys like this. The next track that I want to talk about is by a female artist that was really popular when I first started clubbing, which is around 1999. And this is Raquel. And here's her track, What You Did to Me. What You Did to Me, with the U and the two spelled as the number. And the track that's awesome on here is JP's Club Mix. Now, the reason I like this is because I associate this with really good memories with my best clubbing friend at the time, Roger. Roger and I used to go to this club called Babylon down in Philly, and the DJ that played there, I don't even know who the local resident DJ was on Friday nights, but he would play this, and it was awesome. You'll notice in the clip that I have here, when the drums start to roll, it almost has this like, it always made me think of when Scooby-Doo is running and his feet just have that like rapid fire like sound to them. I always thought that this sounded like Scooby-Doo feet. And the way that the energy comes off in the track and how hard and dramatic the synths are just gives this thing so much power. This is kind of a testament to a bygone era where the club tracks had a lot more energy to them and kind of like a rawness and like a very dramatic over the top feeling. You just don't really see vocals like this anymore. This is very much a time capsule of what was going on in big rooms in 2000 and to 2002 in rooms like Philadelphia, New York, and like I said, like North Jersey. That's where this was big. The next track I want to cover is a very suspicious looking white label. This is actually a Yanni remix, and the song is called Wishing Well. Now, there's a vocal mix on here that is very much like kind of friendly and uplifting sounding. It's a very nice track on its own, but I think the reason that anybody would be buying this is actually for the dub mix. And this kind of goes along the lines of what I was saying about the 6812 dub, where it's just raw, hard, and over the top. It's basically like a hard house track with some really crazy synths in it. And this thing, above all else, was my favorite Jonathan Peters dub. And people that were really like into the Jonathan Peters catalog know that the dub mixes were like where it was at for the After Hours sound. And this was the After Hours sound of Sound Factory New York for a short amount of time. Next track I want to show you guys is by another female artist. This is Sazi. This came out in 2001 and it was her breakout single called Feelin' Me. Now you can see kind of from the cover here what was going on back in this era. A lot of these girls, these female vocalists, were completely unashamed to just, kind of use their looks to market and broadcast themselves and get themselves out there. And I'm not saying that Kim was untalented by any means. She was definitely a great singer. I actually saw her sing this song at Shampoo Nightclub in Philly one time. But there were a handful of girls that were sort of like trying to pull off this look, like, hey, I look great, I can sing well, come invite me to your club, I'll sing a gig for you. And then all these other, remixers like Plasmic Honey, Hex Hector, Jonathan Peters, Danny Tenaglia, they would all sort of like jump onto that and remix it and try to put out the best version of it that they could. So you had all these remixers kind of like competing with each other for top dog status in this local scene.
Everybody's uptight tonight. I don't care what I wear or what they say about us. I just wanna dance. I just wanna lose myself. I just want the chance to finally let it go. You feel like me, I can feel like you right here, right now. Oh, you feel like me, I can feel like you touch me, touch me. Oh, you feel like me, I can feel like you right here, right now. Oh, you feel like me, I can feel like you touch me.
Like I said, I don't think any of these types of releases really made it to the overseas markets. Like I'm sure that my UK friends that subscribe to my channel that are watching this are just like, I have no idea what this is. But for people that lived where I live, this was the sound. This was huge. Last one I want to cover today is a bit of an obscurity for many reasons. It's obscure because, first of all, Karissa Noel, I'm not sure how you say that, she only put out one album. There's a CDR version of it listed on Discogs, and there's no release date for it. It's got about 10 tracks on it. One of the tracks on there is called Corrupt. And Corrupt is actually a really well-written song. It's got great lyrics to it. Jonathan Peters somehow got involved with the remix project for this and made what I think is one of his best remixes of all time. As far as like pure drama, strength, and power, this is where this was like number one for me, or maybe number 2 or 3 at the worst. There's a story behind Corrupt when this initially was played. Apparently, I wasn't there at this night at Sound Factory, but apparently Jonathan Peters looped the intro to this for about 10 or 20 minutes. It's a very distinguishable intro because it has this metal pinging sound that goes off every 8 beats or maybe every 16 beats. But when you hear that ping, you know that it's this track. I heard him play it on Classics tonight, and I was like, I know what that is. And when she actually gets to singing in this, her vocal is just, it's so cool. It's basically describing like a girl's attempt to steal another woman's man from her. And the way that she does it, it just sounds so diabolical and sneaky that it fits with the dark vibe and aesthetic of this track. This track blew the roof off of Sound Factory at Classics Night in 2002, and it sort of etched it into my memory. It's like, I can't believe how awesome this was. It was my first time like really getting to hear it live, and I felt the power of it, and it just completely tore the roof off. That's all I have for today, guys. I'm probably going to come back and do a part 2 for Jonathan Peters because he has such a big catalog of remixes. There's at least another episode, maybe 2, that I could probably pull out of this. Jonathan, thank you so much for all of your work that you did in the early 2000s. I think your body of work is awesome there, and I think there's even still some records that I have to go back and explore and check out myself. Everyone have a great night, and take care. Peace.